Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. This one's going to be fun. Stephen and I go way back, and we've been friends for a number of years, and this is something like his umpteenth dozen book that he's done. He's always seems to be writing and pointing out new things, everything from craft spirits to beer. We're going to be talking about beer today, which is something that I miss terribly. And if you've listened to any of my podcasts recently, I got diagnosed as a celiac late last year, and I can't drink one of my favorite liquids anymore, which is just a horrible, horrible state of affairs. I still can drink whiskey, but I can't drink beer. So today we're going to be talking about the World Atlas of Beer, version 3. We're going to get into the story for that one. So welcome, Stephen. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, it's great to be chatting with you. Even if we have to do it across the country, at least we can get together.
I keep telling people that I've got a long list of people. You've been on the show before at Toronto Cocktail Conference in 2019, so over 2 years ago now. Wow. And I've got a long list of people I always want to catch up with live and do chats and that sort of thing live. But more and more so, we have to do it over digital and do it over Zoom and live streams and everything.
Yes, it's because it's been a very eventful 2 years, hasn't it?
It has, and does feel weird. Like it was literally 2 years ago today that was the last Toronto Cocktail Conference in October. And so it's just crazy that what's happened in the last 2 years. It feels like it's gone by in 2 seconds. Well, sometimes it does. But let's dive in, because I'm going to link up the original episode I did with you and Christine Zismondo about the last book when you did the craft spirit book for Canada. Let's dive into the World Atlas of Beer. Now, you've been doing this for some time. When was the Volume 1 come out?
Volume 1 came out in 2012.
Wow.
So we did, we've done it every 4 years. So it was 2012, 2016, and this is where it gets interesting, 2020.
So it was every 4 years for the plan was every 4 years.
Yes, yeah. And in fact, it did actually work out to be every 4 years, because this third edition is a unique edition. It finished mostly. I was still writing it when I was down in Brazil, just pre-pandemic. I got back from Brazil, I think, one day before Toronto went into lockdown. So wow. I just skirted in. Still finishing the book. And then, it did come out in the UK last year in September 2020. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, because of the craziness of the world, we weren't able to get it published in North America. So it was only in the UK. The weird little upside of this is that it allowed Tim Webb, my co-author, and I to update the book completely for COVID. So we've got all sorts of pandemic information in there, how it impacted different markets around the world, how it closed some breweries. Unfortunately, there's one notable point where sadly the Falling Rock bar down in Denver shut down, but it's still listed in the book, even with a photo, because it was such a great bar. Sorry to see it go, but mostly we were able to keep it all current. No kind of dead breweries still lingering around in the book, and a lot of updated information as to what happened during this whole pandemic.
So with from version 1 2012, like 2012 is 9 years ago now, how I kind of felt like when I was thinking about this is like, how is it still just one book? How is it not like a Encyclopedia Britannica now, like where you're going like, oh, you can start with breweries of A and B this month?
Well, I mean, we have more than doubled the number of countries that we cover in the book. We're up to over 125 countries with legitimate beer scenes that are covered in the book. The book is bigger. There are fewer maps, oddly enough. For something called an atlas, we had to get rid of some of the maps to make space. But it's just cramming information in there. We had to sacrifice some of the pretty language just to get the information in there. I believe this book is the best of the 15 books that bear my name on the front cover. I really am very, very proud of this effort, and as I said, it's as up to date as you could possibly get in a book.
So how has the industry as a whole changed since that very first volume outside the countries and stuff like that? Obviously the explosion of craft beer. We're pretty spoiled here in Canada, especially here on the west coast in BC. You know what our scene is like here in BC. There's a brewery opening up every 2 to 3 days, it
Yeah.
seems, and the ones that have been around for a while, Driftwood's new facility is absolutely massive. Their new facility here in Vic West is a absolutely beast of a facility. So how has it changed on from a personal level from that volume one? Because even 2012, like you sort of look at Australia, you look at Canada to a degree, the UK, everything outside of that was still a bit of a barren wasteland to a certain degree.
Well, it's really interesting because, as you know, I've been following beer for 30 years now professionally. So dating back to 1990, and it was almost like 1990 to 2010. It was growing. I mean, it was growing a lot, but it was when 2010 to 2020, the amount of growth globally was just phenomenal. I mean, we're talking. I've actually not gone back and done the exact numbers of breweries in the world, but you know, easily quintupling the number of breweries scattered around the globe. When I first went down to Brazil, I think that was 2012 or 2011. There were probably 3 or 4 dozen breweries operating in Brazil, and now they're easily over 1,200.
Oh
It's
wow.
phenomenal. Mexico, when we wrote the first edition of the Pocket Beer Guide, which would have been for 2013, I went down to Mexico and I literally tasted beer from pretty much every brewery in Mexico, which like maybe 30 or 40, and now they too are over 1,200.
That's
uh, and
crazy.
and the quality level. This is the really important thing. The overall quality level of beer around the world has just risen so high. You used to be like 10, 15 years for a country's beer scene to kind of go from, hey, this is homebrew that's now professional, to, oh, this is a really good beer.
Mhm.
And now countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, they're doing that in 5 years, less than that even.
Wow.
Just incredible. And part of it is the internet. I mean, there's so much exchange of information between brewers around the world now that there are more conferences than ever, but it's almost like you don't even need the conferences because you've got these chat rooms, you've got these chat boards. Craft brewers are incredibly supportive of each other and share information phenomenally well.
So I'm guessing everybody's probably thinking the exact same thing as me right now. You've got one of the best jobs in the world. Obviously, you just travel around the world drinking beer. When you do this book and you have to revisit a lot of things, are you getting a lot of stuff, especially during this one where the pandemic shut us down for the last 2 years? Did you have a lot of beer sent to you and shipped to you, or were you still trying to visit as much as you could?
Well, sadly, well, not sadly, I'm very happy to live in Canada, but sadly, our borders are very, very difficult. So I don't get a lot of beer shipped to me. In fact, I don't even get a lot of beer shipped to me from within Canada. Uh, but I try to stay up to date as much as possible. I'm tentatively getting my feet back out on the ground and starting to travel again. I'm double vaccinated, and I'll go through all the rigmarole. I'm very good traveler in terms of being
Hmm.
prepared and such. Um, but there's no substitute for just being out there and going to the breweries and going to the bars and experiencing the beer cultures. Because for me, the beer is important, but the culture that surrounds the beer is equally important. And you can't, I mean, nobody can ship that to you.
This is true. For your tips, like when you start doing these sort of trips, I know that when I visit cities and I've only got like 24, 48 hours, which is usually my like length of stays, as you know, when you're doing these sort of trips, do you have a rule of thumb of how you get around and taste as many beers as possible? Because it's a little bit different when I go and I do a cocktail at a bar and a bite to eat and I try and hit as many places as I can in a night. My wife gets very weirded out when she sees that I've been to 8 bars by the time it's like 9 o'clock at night. And I'm like, I'm fine. What are you talking about? I walk between the bars. I have my rules. How do you find for palate fatigue and everything else? Like, have you got a rule of thumb of how you get around and taste all these beers at these breweries and these bars?
Well, yeah, it can be very difficult, very stressful, very straining. Palate fatigue is real. Um, but what I'm trying to do is most of the time, unless there's a specific brewery I've gone to, oh, these guys have a really good reputation. I want to try, as much of their stuff as I can. What I'm really trying to do is get a sense of the overall scene. I'm a big picture guy.
Hmm.
So if I can go to one thing I like to do is judging at contests. So if I can judge at a national beer competition, I get an immediate snapshot of how good the general quality of the beer is around that country. If I can go to like a beer capital, Portland, Oregon, London, England, and just kind of hit a bunch of good bars that have multiple styles of beer on tap, I can get a good sense of oh, this is a great bar because of this. This is I hate doing tasters, but you have to do tasters. So you're tasting a bunch of things, and it's like, yes, I'm writing notes, but more importantly, I'm getting a sense of what is really happening on the ground.
Do you think that, as you know, like when you travel and you go to different cities and that sort of thing, do you think the culture of the city affects? I know here in Victoria, I like to call it the IPA wars of a couple of years ago, when everybody was just trying to hop the crap out of their beers and the
Yeah.
more and more hops. And that's what it was funny. I think it was about 2013, 2014. And we had like the 20-pounder coming from Driftwood and that sort of thing. And I remember people coming up from California going, I love IPAs. I'm like, just be careful when you say that going into bars in Victoria, because you're going to get a fat tug, which is it's as hoppy as some of the really big hoppy beers in California at that time. I'm like, just be careful when you say that. Do you think the culture of the city affects and molds the beer styles from a lot of breweries? Or do you think breweries sometimes come out and try and break the mold?
Uh, Both, yeah. You know, every country has its own particular strength, and sometimes the frustration is that I'll be in a country and I'll be tasting that strength of their scene, but
Hmm.
all they really want to do is pump out hazy IPAs. And Australia, a couple of years ago, I was in Brisbane, I was in Melbourne, I went on the Sunshine Coast, and what amazed me were the low alcohol beers that they're able to do. The amount of
Mm.
flavor they were able to cram into these 3.5% alcohol beers. It's just amazing. And I was so impressed. But are those the beers that, some brewery is going to make its reputation on? Probably not. They're going to make a reputation on their IPA. They're going to make a reputation on the way they use their Galaxy hops or something like that. So it is that. And then on the kind of breaking the mold thing, there's a great example. It hasn't even officially been released in Ontario yet, but two breweries, Tooth and Nail in Ottawa and Godspeed Brewing here in Toronto, have combined in a new company called Abbé de 7 Minutes, and they're doing Trappist Abbey style beers. They've got
Awesome.
they don't have names. They just have Roman numerals for 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you can probably guess the styles from 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're doing great stuff. But Belgian beer is not popular right now. Like,
Hmm.
this is not what you want to be doing. And these guys just said, "Hell with it. We're gonna have some fun, and they're good beers too. They're not just copycat Trappists. They're
Hmm.
unique takes on the styles, which I really appreciate."
I love a good. I used to love a good Trappist this time of year when it starts getting wet and windy outside. A nice
Yeah.
Trappist is lovely. So this is a good segue into Flagship February. This is something you started a couple of years ago now, and it does go back to that. And I talk to distillers about this. I talk to restaurant owners about this. Usually, the people who start breweries and restaurants and distilleries and stuff are very passionate people, and the business is always sort of like a secondary in the back of the head. Like, if we break even and we can take a little bit of money home ourselves, we'll be happy. And so, what was the sort of driving force behind the Flagship February?
Well, it came about by accident. There was a social media interaction. I'm pretty sure it was on Twitter, and it was this culture that has arisen in especially in beer Twitter or craft beer circles, like not the casual drinkers, but the deep divers.
Hmm.
That, oh, what do you got that's new? So you can go into even a great beer bar like Bar Hop up the road from me, and it's like, okay, I want something that's good and reliable, and I can just sit here and drink it and have enjoy it. But they've got like 7 new beers from 6 new breweries because that's what people want to drink.
Mm-hmm.
So I was saying, why not just celebrate what we've got? Like the beers, and the phrase I came up with was the beers that got us here. The Sierra Nevada Pale Ales, the Bose Lug Treads, the Driftwood Fat Tug,
Mm-hmm.
Central City Red Racer Pale Ale. What a solid beer. That I was out in Vancouver recently, and I was constantly told, oh, nobody even thinks about Central City Red Racer anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
that's such a good, it might be the best pale ale in Canada. And
Mm-hmm.
it's wonderful. So I suggested, well, maybe we should have Flagship February. And before I knew it, like literally within 2 days, it went from, oh, we should have Flagship February, ha ha ha, to holy crap, we're building a website.
And what was the response to that? Because it's been 3 or 4 years now, hasn't it?
It's we did the first one. I guess we did the first one in 2018.
Mm.
Yeah, that was right. And then the response was extraordinary. Like we had somebody look at the analytics on our social media traffic, and they said, this is equivalent to a major company that planned this launch for like 2 years. That's the kind of traffic we were getting. So there was definitely a lot of interest. We had bars jumping on board saying, oh, we want to do events, we want to do this, we want to do
That's
that.
awesome.
And it was really great. It was wonderful to see that there were enough people, I guess, older people who aren't into the whole what do you got that's new culture,
Mm-hmm.
and just wanted to celebrate some of the great old school beers that are still kicking around.
And I think that's the thing is like in the that deep diving geeky sort of element, everybody's always like, "What's you got new on tap? What do you got new on tap?" But really, you go and I always like to say to the young bartenders when they get a little bit high and mighty about like geeky amaros and stuff, I was like, just go to a liquor store, go to a really good liquor store, and just watch what people buy for like half an hour. Hang out on the shelves, looking what they have. People still buy a certain vodka. They still buy like Bombay Sapphire. They still buy Lucky Lager, and it's like people still do, like there's still a lot of people like that still just support the brands that they've supported for the last 30 years. It's like it's not always about the new flashy new thing and the cool ingredient that just hit the market.
Yeah, I will tell people that all the time. It's like, go back and try something that's classic.
Mm-hmm.
Have a St. Bernardus Ab 12. You can get it for like $3.50 in the LCBO here.
Yeah.
And just pick it up and drink it. And it's like, wow, this is a revelatory event. Just
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal. I was able to go out and get a wonderful Lambic Gueuze from Driefonteinen, Cuvée Allemand et Gaston, for I think it was $14 at the LCBO, straight off the shelves, no big deal, no special ordering or anything. And to taste that alongside all these, and I'm not going to say bullshit sour beers, but all these bullshit sour beers that are on the market today, and the depth and the complexity and the flavors and the character, and you compare the two, it's like, I'm sorry, there is no comparison.
I've had a couple of sour beers by accident. I had a keg of, I'm not going to remember what it is, but it was a brown ale from Belgium. And it was just a good classic brown ale. And the keg I tapped was off. It happens every now and then, especially when it comes directly from Belgium. And so I took the tap handle off and I poured it for a whole bunch of geeks because it had gone sour. And all of them were just like, this is the best Flanders brown I've ever tasted in my life. I'm like, I'm sending the keg back. It's bad. One man's taint is another man's treasure. That's what I always say. But it was one of those ones like, guys, it's a tainted beer. But it's just how you position it. It's how you position it always. So talking about Flagship February and what keeps the lights on, that sort of thing. Overall, for the craft brewing business, we were talking about it off in the green room. We've seen a massive explosion, as you said, like, and there's always articles that say that craft beer is the next big thing, and there's the next week there'll be an article from the exact same magazine saying craft beer is saturated and it's not going to be sustainable, so on and so forth. Where do you see the sustainability long term, especially coming out of the pandemic, for the craft beer movement worldwide?
Well, this is really interesting because the place that you hear the most complaining about craft beer saturation is the United States. And of course, there are parts of the United States that, yeah, they are getting saturated. But when you look at the actual brewery numbers, the vast majority of them are selling 70 to 90% of the beer out their front door.
Mhm.
So it's not like they're crowding supermarket shelves or they're trying to get tap space. They'll have like a half a dozen taps around the town, and everything else they sell out of their own place. So the number of in terms of saturation are kind of misleading. Um, the United States, for all the breweries it has, and it's somewhere around 1/3 of all the breweries in the world now are in the
Wow.
United States. But when you look at them on a per capita basis relative to population, they're behind Canada, they're behind the UK, they're behind New Zealand, they're behind France. France
Huh.
has more breweries than any other country in Europe today.
Wow.
So, there's a lot more going on than what the numbers show. I don't hear anybody complaining about saturation in Ontario, but there's somewhere between 400 and 450 brewers and beer firms operating in Ontario, about 1/3 of all the breweries in Canada. Um, and it works because you've got this little town in rural Ontario, and they're selling their beer to the people in that town and maybe their town next over. And that's all they need to do in order to keep the lights on and keep the business afloat.
Hmm. That's a really good thing. It's interesting about the US, the one third of all breweries in the US, but per capita they're behind so many. That is fast. That's fascinating. That is fantastic. So, talking about the pandemic briefly, I don't want to get too much into the pandemic because we've all tried to do our best to stay busy. You updated another book. You were doing videos on delivery services. I think we had a little bit more hardship with distilleries doing delivery in BC just because of the way they were set up. But how did the breweries in your neck of the woods sort of step up to make sure that people were still getting beer when you couldn't go out anywhere?
It was amazing, and this is part of the update that we have in the World Atlas. Is I contacted all of my contacts, not just across Canada but around the world in various countries, and Tim did the same with all his contacts. We pretty much divide up the world between the two of us, and we were able to find out that because small breweries are small, they're also nimble. So to take an example of Ontario, a guy named Cass Enright set up the Ontario beer delivery page. I forget what the exact words were on it, and he started listing all the breweries that were doing deliveries,
Oh wow.
and that grew exponentially to the point that he started positioning certain breweries because he has to pay his bills. He did some promotional work, so if you paid a fee, you could get your brewery highlighted. But he
Mm-hmm.
was also highlighting uh, female-owned breweries. He was highlighting minority-owned breweries, and he really kind of breweries that had achievements like the living wage. I forget what it's called, but there's a status that you get when you're certified as a living wage for your area, and we have a lot of breweries in Ontario that are doing that now. So he was able to even adjust the list to feature breweries that were doing things right. But generally speaking, around the world, delivery and canning as opposed to kegging,
Mm-hmm.
it affected the bottom line in a positive way. I talked to guys down in Argentina who said, yeah, everyone had to start canning their beer because the craft industry used to be about 70 to 80% draft.
Mm.
And there was no draft because all the bars were closed. So they started canning. They figured out that they made significant more money when they were canning their beer as opposed to selling it in kegs. So
Crazy.
it was actually beneficial to the industry as a whole.
Wow. And we've always been under the assumption that if you don't have the kegs, if you don't have the tap listings, that you're going to fail miserably pretty quickly.
Yeah, because people would go to bars, and because they tasted something at a bar, they'd buy it at the
Mm.
store. But if you don't have a bar and you don't have a store, you're
How
just
do you get it?
buying a beer, right? I've talked to brewers who have said that 2020 was their best year ever in terms of
That's
sales, in
awesome.
terms of profitability.
That's fantastic. So now we're going to get down to the nuts and bolts, the things that. What's your favorite brewery? What's been your favorite experience or your favorite brewery? I know you probably get asked this question all the time. Like, out of all your travels and stuff, obviously you like your styles. Okay, let's start with this question. What's your favorite style of beer if you have one?
I don't have one. It's not part of the job description. I do taste beer on a regular basis. There are going to be some styles that I like more than other styles, but also at different times of the year, there's going to be styles that I'm drawn to and styles that I'm drawn away from. A hot summer day, I'm not necessarily going to want to open the barley wine.
Yeah.
But I'm not really professionally allowed to not like a style or to favor a style. What I do like is beers that are unique for their style. So, everyone my age who's a beer drinker is complaining about the hazy IPAs now. So why should I be any different? I'll complain. You've got a lot of hazy IPAs that are using these new hops that have a lot of tropical fruit aromas. They contribute very little bitterness in the way that they're being used. So most hazy IPAs are relatively low in bitterness, high in olfactory component, and end up being all the freaking same. So then you have an IPA that cuts through that and is a phenomenal interpretation of the style, and that gets my attention. Sierra Nevada's I think it might be their top selling beer right now, maybe just behind the Pale Ale, is their hazy little thing, their version of the hazy IPA. And it's great because it's got that olfactory component. It's got the haze, but it also tastes like an IPA. It's got bitterness. It's got aftertaste. It's got the whole package. So, am I going to drink that happily? Of course I am. It's a lovely beer. And it doesn't taste like all the other pretenders.
So I'm not going to ask you about your favorite brewery because I know that's going to be difficult to ask. What was the one place that you went for the first time? I know we've talked about Brazil and Argentina and Mexico and stuff. The first time you went and you landed with sort of not necessarily preconceived notions, but like, okay, let's see how this is going to be. And then you were like, oh shit, this is awesome.
That would be not the first, but the second time in Mexico. I was invited down for Cerveza Mexico, which is a competition, a festival, and a trade conference. And I had already, as I said, that first time I did the tastings of all the breweries in Mexico, and I was really impressed. But it was a small number of breweries, and hey, who knew there was Mexico beer besides Corona and all this kind of stuff. This was maybe 3 years later, and the amount that the industry had grown, the breweries, like the stuff I was tasting was like, where did this brewery come from, and how come they're doing such good beer so early in their lives? It was really, really impressive. And I've got to say, I had a lot of that same experience in two notable countries where I had that same type of thing, Brazil and Italy. Were both very impressive. But I do think that Mexico is one of the most interesting beer cultures in the world today.
Do they sort of lean into, obviously Corona and those like easy drinking lagers and stuff like that are obviously always going to be king for the beaches and stuff, but what sort of styles of beer that blew you away there, that you were like, oh, this is completely insanely unique for this area?
Well, originally it was the Mexican Imperial Stout, which was a great Imperial Stout style with mole flavors in it. So you get the spices, you get the chocolate, you get a little bit of pepper sometimes. And then the American craft breweries caught on to this, and they started making their own interpretations. And the American beer geeks went nuts for this. Like their Mexican cake was one of the really cult versions. New Belgium Brewing did their version, et cetera, et cetera. And some of them were very good. None of them were better than the best in Mexico, because the Mexican understood the spices, they understood the chocolate better than the Americans. And then the Mexicans kind of said, okay, well, and in fact, I've got a quote from a guy in the third edition of the Atlas, a brewer. He said, well, we'll let the Americans have their fun with this. We've moved on. And so they're doing new things. And he said, and if the Americans ever want to come down, we'll show them how to do it right. We're happy to do that.
That's fantastic. So what's your plan for the next 6 to 12 months? What's with the book coming out and the sort of push, what's the direction for you for now that everything's sort of opening up and building?
Well, I'd love to get back on the road. I've been lucky enough that over the course of the pandemic, I've had a couple of trips which have just been timed kind of perfectly between lockdowns and such. But I'm really anxious to get out there again, especially get back over to Europe, which I miss horribly. It's been well over 2 years now. Back down to South America as well. I think I've been talking to my publisher about a new book. So hopefully something will happen with that, and I'll get
You're
started.
as bad as me. As soon as one comes out, you're like, oh, I got to start my next one.
Well, 2020 was the first year in I don't know how many years that I did not have a book contract, and it felt really, really weird. And now I'm over halfway through 2021, still without a book contract in my hand. It's like, wow, that's a strange feeling. I don't know whether it's liberating or terrifying. I'm not sure.
I am looking forward to traveling as well. Like I'm hoping to be in Lisbon in the new year for a couple of months.
Nice.
To a project, and I've tasted it again. I can't do it anymore, but like I've tasted some Portuguese craft beer, and some of the stuff that they're doing is very, very fun as well. Very, very fun.
That's a place that I have not been to for years, and very overdue to go back there, because they're starting to catch up a bit to Spain in terms of their creativity, not in terms of sheer numbers. Spain still has a phenomenal number of breweries relative to their size. But they are getting creative again and really kind of pushing the envelope a bit more. And one of the great things is that we really emphasize this in this new edition. One of the great things that's happening around the world is countries are doing their own thing. They're not just trying to do what the US is doing or do what Belgium's doing or whatever. They're developing their own styles of beer. So you've got Amazonian influenced beers down in Brazil. The fruits of the Amazon that we've never even heard of that they're using beautifully in Catarina sours. You've got the Mexicans, they're using tequila mezcal barrels now. They've got some really interesting stuff. The grape ale from Italy, the Italian grape ales. Nobody does stuff with grapes and wine barrels better than the Italians. It's just, and the sake influenced beers in Japan. It's just so great to see that they're not just trying to do the same thing. This is our thing. This is what we're going to be known for, and let's go and do this.
So let's do one more plug for the book, The World Atlas of Beer, Volume 3.
Call it 3.1.
3.1. It's going to be when is it officially releasing?
It officially is out on November 2nd. It's available for pre-order now at all the usual outlets, or just go to your local bookstore and say, can you let me know when it comes in? Because I want to get a copy.
Let me buy 5 copies for you right now. Thank you so much for your time, Stephen. I really appreciate it. That was awesome.
It's a pleasure chatting with you, Shawn. Anytime.
We'll chat to you real soon. Thanks for